And one of the VPs who thought I was high potential probably thought I was a punk, looked at me and said, you're a pretty smart guy, Russell. Thanks. Like, then he said, why do you think the people who aren't as smart as you are making more money than you?
Bold question.
And I was lucky enough to not be offended by that question, but instead to be humble in the face of that question and realize that life is not about how smart you are. Life is about using your smarts to help other people figure out what they need and get what they need, and then making sure you commandeer value in the process. And that's those sort of experiences are what kind of flipped the mentality and the mindset for me.
Welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast with Zach Palmer, the show where we explore the strategies, insights, and stories that empower you to grow your business, strengthen your relationships, and elevate your health. Because growth isn't just about what you achieve, it's about who you become along the way. Now, today I'm thrilled to welcome Russell Scherwin. Russell is the former CMO of Watson Commerce at IBM and currently a consultant, limited partner, and member of the board of advisors through B2B Tracks, where he has successfully trained thousands of sellers and aligned dozens of leadership teams on go-to-market messaging and execution. Russell believes that success lies in our ability to balance ego and humility. Now let's dive in and take another step on your journey to perpetual growth. Russell, welcome. It is super exciting to have you here today.
I can't wait to spend more time chatting with you, Zach. This is going to be a blast.
Me as well, my friend. Well, as my listeners know, I always like to start each podcast with providing my interviewee an opportunity to just expand a little bit on their story history. Now, if you would, tell the audience a little bit about where you started in business. What were some of the major turning points, milestones, the challenges, the successes that led you to where you are today, and potentially some of those lessons?
Awesome. Is it okay if I rewind back even farther and go before? So when I look in the mirror, I still see a timid, scared 9-year-old kid who is scared to speak in public. By the way, I speak in front of public on a routine basis. I've been voted top speaker on multiple continents. I see a scared kid. And I also see a kid who thinks that all salespeople are slimy. And somehow through time, curiosity, and a little bit of humility, that's changed over time. I'm a techie at heart. My first job out of school, besides being a basketball scout, was I helped build a product called WebSphere at IBM. And I was lucky enough to learn at IBM from a great mentor that you need to focus your hours between 9 and 5, 8 and 6, 7 and 7, 6 and 10 on the things you're most passionate about. And doing something just because it pays the bills isn't going to make you a happy human or a fulfilled human being. And I realized my passions lie not in building technology, but in its socioeconomic impact, whether we're talking about the wheel in agriculture, whether we're talking about DNA, or whether we're talking about the internet or artificial intelligence. And so the past 25 years, whether the title has been sales, marketing, or individual contributor, or CMO or CRO, the focus has always been helping drive a mission where technology was advancing, frankly, our species' aim, but doing so in a manner that created value for a customer, for a selling organization, and for the people who were personally involved in the transaction. So that's a fun roundabout introduction, but I hope that was at least gave you some starting points.
No, it does. What's so fascinating, I love hearing more about the evolution of the individual, and for me, one of the first questions that tends to come up, not always, but in many cases, is where did those beliefs fundamentally evolve from? Were these were these ideas something that were instilled from you, from parents, from other mentors early on? Was it a byproduct of the environment you grew up in, the neighborhood, the school system? Like, what do you initially attribute to driving you this direction in business and fundamentally developing the beliefs that have allowed you to achieve what you achieved today?
So your question really about, make sure I get the question right, Zach, is around mindset, that we started from, what it was, and then how we evolved the mindset. Is that fair?
Yep. Yes.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about the start of the two mindsets I mentioned, which is scared to speak in public, and then all sellers are slimy. Number one, in terms of the mindset around being scared to speak in public, I got a bunch of psychological things. I got ADHD and anxiety, which is, I think, 90% of us have it in some form or another today. But also an auditory processing disorder, which I probably have. I know my son does. And I just was not natural. I was not a natural speaker. And I kind of thought that you just get up in front of a room and you talk. And I remember in the 4th grade, being 9 years old, getting up in front, I don't even remember what it was, And I just remember the kids laughing at me, or maybe in my head they were laughing at me because I was just terrified. And I remember running out of the class crying. And I also have a thing in me where I love conquering weaknesses. And so later on in life, it was just like, all right, I can either be scared of it or I can treat every speaking opportunity like jumping out of a plane. Mm-hmm. And so the mindset there started from just a quote unquote traumatic childhood experience that I just decided I was going to get over. However, the salesperson one was a lot more fun in that sometimes you just pick things up, right? My dad was a CFO. For my 18th birthday, I didn't get a car. I got a TCO statement on my life, right? So like, I don't know, like maybe they would say things, or maybe we walked into a car dealership, or, you just hear things and there's common misperceptions out there. And I just had it in my head where sales was this thing where you had to be pushy. And I'm not a pushy person. I'm an introvert. And so I thought salespeople were extroverts. And it wasn't until I moved away from programming and into consulting that I realized the best place in the world to help craft a vision for a better future state and help an organization, move to that future state and realize that vision is by selling. Selling to me is simply the act of, and this is what I've come to over time, it's a mindset really where salespeople do three things, and it's three things only. Mm-hmm. They attach to big problems that must be solved. They differentiate their offering in how they're addressing those problems, and they partner on a mutual plan to execute the plan to achieve the vision. And what most people think the job of a salesperson is mobilizing and motivating people to do certain things. But the truth is, selling is simply about attaching your offering and your capabilities to something that somebody else needs, or better yet, helping them realize something they may need, which they may not yet be aware of based upon goals they already have. And so once you get to the point that all selling is doing is aligning what you do with the already existing needs that someone else or some other organization has, you realize, oh, wow, selling, when done properly, because most don't do it properly, when done properly, selling is the highest integrity sport there is out there. And I say sport because the other good sellers are also attaching to those same needs and trying to differentiate their offerings. And that's when it becomes a competitive battle. But it's an incredibly high integrity sport. But it only came, frankly, because of humility. And we spoke ego and humility earlier. And it was just at some point in my life, I realized, wow, I'm pretty dumb. Mm-hmm. And I'm not dumb, but I don't have all the knowledge. I don't have all the context. And I'm not going to go through life thinking I know everything. I'm going to go in life trying to figure out what I don't know. And you actually learn in sales that the best sellers are those who they're comfortable with knowing what they know. They're comfortable with knowing what they don't know, but they're terrified of not knowing what they don't know. Mm-hmm. And once I kind of hit that bone where I had a passion for figuring out what I didn't know, it was like, wow, maybe sales isn't so bad. Because I have one thing, and I'll let you get back to you because I'm speaking too much right now, is I was really lucky once. A mentor said to me, I was in some big marketing role. I had my MBA, so I had a marketing title and some strategy, something or other. And I was acting like that pompous, smart person early in my career. And one of the VPs who thought I was high potential probably thought I was a punk, looked at me and said, you're a pretty smart guy, Russell. Thanks. Like, then he said, why do you think the people who aren't as smart as you are making more money than you?
Bold question.
And I was lucky enough to not be offended by that question, but instead to be humble in the face of that question and realize that life is not about how smart you are. Life is about using your smarts to help other people figure out what they need and get what they need, and then making sure you commandeer value in the process. And that's those sort of experiences are what kind of flipped the mentality and the mindset for me.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I mean, there's a couple things I extracted from that. One, not to oversimplify, but sales is service. When we have a product that we believe in, that is helping to solve someone's problem and in turn present and help them create a brighter future, then we are ultimately serving that audience at the highest level. And I think that in and of itself is a beautiful gift. And I wholeheartedly agree. I think Sales is one of those things, are there slimy salespeople? Absolutely. I mean, my first visions of the sales professionals are like you. I remember sitting down in the car dealership next to my dad and listening to the negotiations, and they're drawing the four squares and going back and forth between their desk and the sales manager's office and all that crap. And I'm like, wow, this is interesting. And then I got a very early introduction to sales myself at 16 years old and learned a lot the hard way, but also the right way. I mean, through the experience of modeling. One thing I'm interested in is how did that belief evolve for you? Because, well, actually, let me take a step back. There's something else I want to peel back the onion on. You talked about what makes a salesperson successful when they approach sales properly. Do you have a fundamental framework, questions you're asking, lenses that you are looking through that help you determine, what is the potential of this person in a sales role? Who is already successful and can be developed, and who is just not right or a good fit for this particular position at all? I mean, how do you approach sales development, both from a leadership standpoint and from an individual growth standpoint?
What a great question. Before I answer that question, can I go back to your premise on sales as kind of just service?
Yeah, please.
Which it is in a high integrity way. What I want to add to that is the difference between a seller and a consultant. A consultant serves. What a seller is also going to do is they're going to differentiate and they're going to command value for value. That it's subtle, but if all you're doing is servicing someone else's goals, then you're a consultant, not a seller. A sales consultant is going to set themselves apart consciously and explicitly, and they're going to make sure that value is explicitly understood and captured for value received.
Beautiful.
And I only say that because I was that consultant once and I realized how much I was leaving on the table. And frankly, for the customer too. It's amazing what happens when a customer spends a lot of money, they feel invested in a process and they're more likely to get the results, which is a weird dynamic that buyers, especially organizational buyers, they want to spend more money than less money. They want to spend the value they're going to command. But that's a whole other side topic. You asked about sales development.
Well, and actually, as you're speaking to sales development, I think this runs in tandem. When you talk about aspects of sales when it comes to the consulting component, one thing that I find really intriguing about that is I think that's something that the best in the world, I mean, one, you can be trained to do, but two, you do it organically because it comes from the heart and you want to see people grow and develop and not just look at something from a superficiality standpoint, but really understand what's going on in their world and how this solution can potentially bridge that gap and paint a much more brighter future that expands across context. And I think that's the biggest thing is we're not just solving the problem that's immediately in front of them. That's the, potentially the stick that drove them to us to begin with. But in many cases, the solution that we are providing can be much more holistic in terms of how it will show up in their lives. So from a consulting standpoint, I love what you are saying, and I'm really glad that you brought up that differentiation. How do you instill that ideology into both your leadership team and the individuals that are actually executing on the sales floor?
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to a company I partner with, Force Management. We teach what I consider to be one of the best sales methodologies out there. Command of the message, and as part of the methodology, we teach the structure upon which to attach to those big problems. We teach how to differentiate and do so in a manner where it's not by pushing. It's done through asking great questions that help buyers come to their own conclusions. And the act really, this is not the overall answer, but in terms of the how, it's through methodology that teaches structure. Thinking that natural salespeople are born as asinine. There are people that have charisma, and there are people that people will naturally gravitate to. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, but that doesn't mean they sell. That just means they have charisma. And so there's frameworks and methodologies that can be learned and applied. And the best ones, which is one of the reasons why I love Force. Force is an incredibly brilliant structure, but it also accommodates for people's style and allowing people to become their authentic, genuine selves inside of a best of breed methodology. But in terms of sales development, I'll give you, you spoke about there's frankly three elements of having teams. There's number one, identifying the right talent. Two, it's developing the right talent. And three is, growing them. Either you're growing or dying. And same for sales talent too. It's either reps are growing or they're, you're exiting them, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what I'll actually, let me pause for a second because I'm about to go down a rabbit hole. I want to ask for permission to talk about how to hire and develop sales teams. We got to talk about sales process, and that's about a 2.5 minute rabbit hole. Are you okay with me diving down?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, please.
Cool. So it boils down to process. A lot of people don't see the linkage between hiring reps and sales process. And so if you have you seen a CRM system before once or twice, I assume?
Yeah.
In CRM, you have your gates, right? I mean, at the end of the day, for my industry, it's kind of simple. It's a buyer's becoming aware, and you're doing all sorts of silly activities to make the buyer aware. You're picking up the phone, you're sending emails, all that stuff. At some point, the buyer becomes aware they have a problem, and you're working on validating hypothesis. And from there, the next stage is proving the hypothesis financially, then proving it out technically, and then something that looks like that. Mm-hmm. And then for each stage, there are activities that happen that move a buyer to their next stage. And for each activity, there are skills that are required to carry out the activities. And if you want to get more granular, there's different, you can demarcate the skills into different roles in more complex sales organizations. Here's where it gets interesting. Once you realize the skills and roles that are needed to carry out the activities that will progress demand throughout a funnel, you can then say, what skills are teachable and what skills are unteachable? Said differently, what skills are we going to hire for and what skills are we going to enable for? And then you could take a systemic approach to looking at what is the talent we're bringing in and how are we going to develop that talent? And here's where it gets interesting for me. Like when I led the e-commerce business at IBM, I used to say, what's harder? Finding someone who had empathy for the buyer or finding someone that's been selling for 20 years? Well, I'd rather go find someone with buyer empathy who had the right characteristics of integrity, curiosity, and tenacity. If I had someone who was curious, someone who was tenacious, and someone who operated with a high degree of integrity, I can teach them basic selling skills and the selling methodology, and I can coach them. I can't coach having been involved in the ins and outs of building, multiple, $100 million plus e-commerce sites. So there's folks like I mentioned the name John Tinch. I haven't spoken to him in years, but I remember John. John was a savant when it came to putting e-commerce sites into production. And he actually was in a pseudo sales role at the time, but it's like, this guy'd be brilliant. And he's doing something or other with e-commerce right now in some sort of leadership capacity, but he had all the personal characteristics. It's like, cool, I could hire someone like me, or I could hire someone who customers are going to gravitate towards because of the fact that they're a good person, they care about the other individual, and they just plain get it. And I could layer on a couple of sales skills on top of that. That's easy. That's what I'm an expert in. But so I guess, but all that to say, when it comes to developing teams, you need to understand your process first. Mm-hmm. Second, you need to understand specifically what characteristics you're hiring for. What are the unteachables? And then you need to know what the teachables are, and you need to build up the enablement for the things that are teachable. So that way you're giving your people their best shot. And at that point, if you're doing your job, that's when you get into coaching, growing or dying. But that's a different conversation that's going to take away from this positive juju we currently have. So I'll let you redirect.
No, I love that. I mean, I love your mindset behind it. And I think it's contrary to the way that many people approach the hiring process, because what you're talking about is approaching people more from a values and character traits driven analysis, as opposed to tenure and skill sets. Because skill sets inherently, when they have the right values and character traits, can be developed. Whereas when somebody has spent 20 years as a quote unquote expert, or maybe not, in any one particular role or position, the hardest challenge is for any leader is undoing all of the habits, patterns, and rituals that they've already developed that may or may not be creating the success or failures that they're consistently experiencing. So when you're hiring from a value and character trait position, now you get to play a much more integral role in shaping and developing that person from a strategic and tactical standpoint, which I think is a really, really wise and powerful approach. And to me, it's something that's much more exciting. And what I'm curious about at the same time is when, as a leader, one thing that I think that we frequently see in, particularly as it pertains to sales teams, is that sense of urgency. the owners, the CEOs, other people on the C-level leadership suite, they want people brought on the team, onboarded, trained, and producing quickly. And what I'm hearing from you is, with the right person, they can be trained up relatively quickly because they should adapt a lot of those things. But it still is going to require a significant amount of time and attention from that leadership team to ensure that A, I've got the right person, and that B, that I'm raising and grooming them into the high level performer that I know that they can be, the A player. How do you manage that balance between what the organization wants to see and what is going to be best in the long term for building something that is sustainable and scalable?
Well, that's another great loaded question. It's only loaded because there's a couple layers to click into to fully address it, because it's a really good question. Number one, I also want to be very clear. I'm not saying be completely unconventional.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
When I'm hiring someone who's not been in sales before, you have to understand, well, what are the derailers? Well, the derailers are the human psyche responds differently when under duress, like you're operating in a time-based quota. And so you need to be able to cover, okay, how is this person going to behave under different levels of pressure? And the truth is, when it comes to sales, most people who have been an executive in a career which have owed the company revenue or cost savings within a time period, that's actually the same kind of pressure. So you got to look for, okay, what are the derailing things that when you hire in an unconventional way that can derail, and then you need to really be careful in how you're vetting those things. So I've made my fair share of mistakes by enjoying being unconventional. And then the other part of the question was, actually, help me reframe and re-anchor. I want to make sure I got the question down before I anchor to it.
It was really about, if we're looking at the development of a sales team, if you are hiring these individuals, knowing that it's more about managing the mindset of both the executive leadership team and what is ultimately going to create the best sustainable and scalable outcome for the actual sales team itself, and what the balance is between the expectations and the ultimate outcome.
I'll give you a high level answer because it's always going to be situation dependent. It's understanding and communicating gray zone, which is there's always trade-offs, and sometimes going for the person that in theory is going to provide the most upfront or the least ramp upfront is a great option, but then that'll have a lower trajectory. And it's a matter of, with leadership, making sure they understand what the gray zone is, that we might have a 6-month ramp. Is it what for that 6-month ramp? We're going to have, I expect, once you hit month 12, we're going to have someone who's going to be an extreme high performer, where when you hire someone who's been doing this for 19 years, here's what we should expect. Maybe their ramp time's a little bit quicker. They'll hit the ground running, but their ceiling is going to be lower. And so there could be an honest conversation. What do we prefer right now? And as a leader, if you know that you don't perform over the next 6 months, well, then therefore you're probably not going to take the unconventional approach. But I think it's about understanding what the goals are and having honest conversations with your leadership and the particular candidate about what the expectations are and what the realm of possibilities are, and what what would constitute success, what would constitute failure, what would constitute mediocrity, and making sure everyone's on the same page. And granted, I get that's a high level answer, but
what I like about that, what I hear is it's both goals and stage of the game. And what I mean by that, for example, is if you have a team that has hit a revenue cap or potentially revenues in decline, they've got a much greater sense of urgency than somebody that's in a growth stage where revenue is plentiful. So you might have to make a different decision based on the present needs of the company versus what you want to be able to do. Here's what I need to be able to do to help stabilize and create more revenue consistently right now. So that makes sense. It's both goals and present environment.
Let me throw a twist on this to throw something at you, which maybe goes into one of the other 3 dimensions that you played with. There's a third dimension to all this, which is, as humans and organizations, we're agents of an organization. There's the agency effect, which I'm sure you're aware of, which is, as an agent of the organization, I have to do what's right for the organization and its stated goals versus I have to do what's right for me. Mm-hmm. Perhaps there have been times in a career that you've had or I've had where you recognize that you're an agent, but you just say to yourself, you know what, this is not a world worth living in if I have to be risk averse. I'm not willing to be mediocre. I want it to either go through the ceiling or it's just not worth it. So I'm taking that risk. And that's where I think it comes into personal fulfillment when you're an agent of an organization. How do you feel about the agency effect, which is you're subservient to an organization on one hand, but at the same time, as an agent of the organization, you've been delegated power and a scope of responsibility to take certain risks, and certain risks maybe are more worthwhile than others. How do you, when you've been involved in organizations, how do you manage the risk of the organization versus the risk itself based upon, your desire to hit a ceiling, to go through a ceiling versus, not hit the floor?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, for me, I know that somewhat that's going to be tempered relative to position and role. As the owner of a company, I am one of those people that is not risk averse. I am very much about running head towards the problems, the challenges, my greatest fears and opportunities, because I'm either going to succeed or I'm going to learn. I tend to temper that more as a consultant or as somebody that's in a senior level leadership role in an organization, because I'm being a lot more mindful and consider the fact that it's not my money and I have to be more mindful of what is going to be best for the company at the end of the day. So when it's for me, I know I can, and I will more often than not decide to take those risks. Of course, they're going to be calculated and strategic. I'm not just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, but I tend to temper that a little bit relative to where I'm at within the team. And then from there, it really is going to come down to fundamentally understanding where we are as a company, what we are trying to create, and then what the current stage in the game is. I mean, if you're a startup versus a company that's in growth stage, or somebody that's been seasoned and around for 100 years, you might have different opportunities or cards that you can play relative to the team dynamics and environment. So it's really determining what problem we're solving for, how that's leading to that greater outcome, and then weighing what risks are ones that are worth positioning and defending and maybe fighting for within the leadership team, and where it's otherwise wise to take a step back and say, hey, maybe right now is a better time for stability.
Yeah, it's a crazy one. I love the way you kind of go between the lines of what you can versus supposed to do. There's another element to my mindset shifting that happened about 15 years ago around this exact topic. I was a rep at IBM. We had just been acquired, and IBM, it's a monster of an organization. There's a billion people there that can tell you what not to do, and it's hard to find people that can tell you what you can and should do. And I mean, if you think about IBM, there's, let's say Home Depot, there's like 1,300 people that have a quota for Home Depot. It's crazy the level of complexity in there. And my division, which was recently acquired, got an RFP from a company, probably one of the 4 companies in the world that were not an IBM customer. Like, this was a big Oracle shop. We got an RFP and there's a concept of a client executive who owns an overarching relationship, and then us peons who represent one of the brands. And the client exec, saw the RFP like, oh my God, we can actually do something. Maybe it's our way to break in. And I looked at the RFP, and my first response was, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. This company doesn't know how to buy. They don't even know what they're trying to buy. And a little bit back. I mean, you've seen these before. Backstory here is
particularly with government. Yeah.
Exactly. I hit a point a couple months earlier. I was frustrated with IBM, and I'm like, you know what? I'm out of here. And then I said, no, screw with them. I'm not going to let them beat me. I'm going to beat them. And I said, I don't care if I get fired. I'm just going to do because I'm going to leave anyways. I'm going to do things the way that I feel in my heart's the right thing to do. So this RFP was that example where I'm like, you know what? Here, this company probably just Googled, give me all requirements for the solution set. And so the client exec had promised the CIO of this company that IBM will respond. And my perspective was, we'll respond, but I need to speak to the CIO first, because the way it is right now, we're not responding. Because if we respond, we're going to answer the mail. However, they're going to fail because they don't have the right direction. So let's make sure we can help this CIO with, make sure that they have a path to their success versus a path to completing an RFP. And let's just say this individual is not overly happy with me, because not only did he say no to a meeting with the CIO, I'm like, okay, you don't have to say it. I went and I just called up the CIO and said, hey, I'm a little bit worried about the path you're taking here. Let's spend some time. And I'd like to be able to respond to the RFP because I think we're going to be able to address what your business requires. I just don't think the process that's laid out is going to work for you, let alone for us. And the net is they had basically said this was an opportunity. We were selling quoting applications, and this was a company that manufactured oil rigs. They did $31 billion worth of it. And they had set up this process where you were going to write a 50-page response, asinine. And then the top 5 vendors were going to fly in and demonstrate to this team of 31 people that were flying in from all over the world to watch this demonstration. And my perspective was, you either need to tell us what the business requirements are, and you need to give us access to the people whose requirements we're addressing, because you're IT and they're the ones who do the quoting. And as you can imagine, quoting oil rigs is a pretty complex process. And what wound up, the CEO is like, listen, I understand why you need this access, but this process is happening too fast and these people are already flying in. We don't have enough time to give you access and give Oracle access and everyone else access. I'm like, well, how are you going to succeed? Like you're gonna have us coming in, and we can't build overnight some oil rig quoting application. By the way, our 3 competitors, they don't have the ability to quote oil rigs either. They don't know it either. So if what you're saying is true and you haven't given them access, you haven't given us access, you're about to fail in this demo, because you're flying in people from all over the world, and they're going to see demos that have nothing to do with their business. They're going to see generic quoting and configuration applications. And his response to me was, you're probably right, but let's do this. If you come in and you fail just like all the other vendors fail, like we're saying, then I'll give you the access you need. And so we kind of made a deal to what the process should look like, not to help us sell, but to help them implement a great quoting solutions to mitigate some of the challenges that happen with Deepwater Horizon.
Consultancy.
Yeah, it's sales consultancy, and it's helping the buyer understand their needs a little better and helping them understand the process to achieve their needs. And here's what wound up happening. And by the way, this was an Oracle shop where the CIO had been Oracle CIO of the year, the prior year.
Wow.
We failed at our demo, as did everybody else, because the business audience was looking at bicycle quoting or regular machinery quoting. They weren't looking at their process and their future state. And after that, we went out to lunch and we agreed that, okay, here's the process we're now going to follow. And we beat Oracle in an Oracle shop. But back to the story about, balancing short versus long-term in sales, let's go back to what I had said earlier. I had hit the point with IBM that I was so frustrated that I was ready to leave. And then I said, you know what? Screw IBM. I'm going to do what I feel is right. And here's what wound up happening. That client executive who's like, you're not going to go over my head. I'm like, screw you. Nothing against, he's a good dude. But it's not because screw you. It's like, listen, this is what's right for the customer. Like my integrity is telling me I'm going to do what's right for the customer. And here's what wound up happening. We won one of the largest deals we'd ever done. We entered the account. The client exec and I wound up with a great relationship. But what had previously happened, he had escalated the fact that I went around protocol to say no to an RFP and meet with the CIO without him. The more it got escalated up, the more I became admired, the more visibility I had received. And even though there were many people that could say why I shouldn't do something, once it got up to the point where people actually look at process, they said, actually, this is an individual who is doing what we need him to do. And the whole secret to every promotion I received at IBM was, my learning was, play offense with your career, not defense with your career. And if your magnetic north is what's right for the customer, and you got the fearlessness to not be scared of getting fired and do what you think is right, it's amazing the good things that'll happen. That was a long-winded way to get to that punchline, but the punchline there is, if you act with integrity, and have the courage and your convictions to do what's right in a sales career, not only can you push the world around in a sales job, because it's your job to create visions and then mobilize people to achieve visions. And the key is, at least for me, it was, realizing I'm not scared of getting fired. Sorry about the long-winded nature of that, but I felt it's an important story to share.
No, I love that. I mean, that resonated with me on so many levels. One, before you even mentioned that it was in the oil business, that took me back to one of the last and largest contracts I had landed in oil, which was with one of the refineries and outfitting, all their fleet of commercial vessels. And it was the same thing. I mean, when the initial RFP came up, I remember having a lot of these conversations where I was approaching it again from a place of curiosity and consultancy and going, have you considered this? I mean, how this purchasing decision with this particular product, how that's going to hold up in a salt air environment. I mean, just little things that they hadn't really thought of. It was like they had experience with particular products. They really liked and enjoyed it in one environment, but they didn't think about how that would translate to a vessel. And I had to think a lot of those things through in advance. And it was more just about showing up with genuine caring. Have you considered this? Curiosity. What are the use cases? Who are the guys on the ship and the gals on the ship that are going to be partaking in this particular installation? So anyway, that resonated with me because, again, it comes from a place of consultancy and curiosity. And then I love that you talk about the courage to I guess really go against the grain, to run into the headwind. And I think that in of itself is one of the most powerful tips that you provided, because I've been in environments where as a leader, you were expected to do certain things and stay within the box. And this is our way, and this is our ship, and this is the direction that we all row. And as we mentioned, there's a balance to everything. But if you are in a leadership position and you're not being provided with the opportunity to challenge present paradigms and ask, is there a better way to serve the client, to serve our team internally and externally? Then I think we're doing a disservice to the organization and the client experience as a whole, both. And it's hard because I've been a part of the teams where you have the opportunity, where your input is valued, where they want to lean into change, again, within reason. And then I've been a part of the ones where it feels like you're confined and you have no opportunity to really look outside of the mold. And that's not a fun environment for anybody to be in, because now you're not able to leverage your innate talents and skill sets and perspectives that are unique to you because of your life experiences. So I think, balance has been a very common theme throughout this. I mean, across different contexts. I really like that you talk about the consultancy aspect of sales and really understanding the customer a lot more holistically and presenting them with different ideas and being curious about their present environment and the things that they want to create and helping them to illustrate that picture through the power of questions. And one last piece, I would love if you would just expand upon how does it come together in terms of when I'm thinking about a particular sales role or sales team, and we're mapping out a vision and we are let's look at it from a leadership standpoint. And I want to go back to exactly what I just said. If you've got somebody that's sitting in your shoes, what is the advice that you're going to give them? Because if you're on one side of the fence or the other, the team that celebrates ingenuity and innovation and wants to challenge paradigms, that look at different opportunities to grow and evolve, versus a team that has done one thing one way for a very long time, when is it a question of when is now the time to leave? How do you find the organizations that are more willing to approach things differently than as conventional? Sometimes this is a very loaded question. I mean, there's countless different sub questions within. Maybe if you could just approach this from a high level, I would just be curious what your thoughts are.
I see you're in a place where I get to, which is there's so many dots you want to connect right now. I'm with you. I'll connect two of them. The first was, and it goes back to, I love when you talk about health, wealth, and business. I'm going to connect it to wealth, right? So we talk about the unlock being the fear of being fired, and I kind of threw that to the wind. Here's how I was able to throw that to the wind. You asked earlier, so where do you live? I'm in Georgia. I'm a New Yorker, right? What's the rent in New York versus the rent here in Georgia? It's
astronomical, I'm sure.
It's astronomically different.
Yeah.
Right. The house I live in would probably cost 30 times more if I lived in New York. And why do I say that? 10 years prior, my wife and I had made a decision about life values and our risk reward propensity. And I'm not the biggest risk taker in the world. And we had been saving a lot of money because I wanted to be unconventional, but I didn't necessarily have the risk stomach for it. And so what I would guide is, if you understand your own risk reward propensity and you want to be unconventional, build that security blanket. I had given myself a safety net where if I was going to do things and follow my heart, and not just my heart, listen, there was a lot of skill. That one deal I mentioned with that company that made oil rigs, there was a lot of skill that went into that and a lot of hard work. But I had the courage in my convictions to say this is the right way to do it. But at the same time, I wasn't worried about being fired because I had built the safety net for myself to take those risks. So I think wealth plays in a big way, because what I've observed is the average rep is activity oriented. The elite rep is outcome oriented. And the activity rep tends to be activity focused because they're operating in fear of losing their job. Because that's hanging over the rep all the time. And the ability to move to an outcome oriented rep where you're not focused on how much you're doing, but you're focused on getting the most yield from your time comes from being able to be comfortable with taking the highest yield activities, which probably means they're not operating out of fear. And doing that, you need to understand, well, what's your wealth situation look like? Like, can you stomach the risks you're about to take? So number one, it goes to wealth in terms of that dot connected. Let me pause there because I know that's one of your hot buttons. Let me see if you want to riff on that or take that in any direction before I move to another dot.
I just love what you said. I want to honor and celebrate it because I think the biggest differentiator is the difference in mindset fundamentally between scarcity and abundance. And when we're coming from a place of scarcity, fear tends to drive the decisions. And when you're coming from a place of abundance, and the word that I might add to it is surrender, then we create a much different energy and environment. When you make a decision that this is the outcome that I am going to create, and you believe, and you have the fundamental the cushion, literally and or figuratively, that regardless of what outcome happens, I'm still going to be okay. When you come from that abundant mindset and you surrender to the decision and stick with it and maintain that belief, it completely transforms the experience, both internally and externally. And people can feel that. And I can think back to the times where I was selling from a place of scarcity and comparing it to the times where I had gone through a mindset and exponential transition in the way that I was showing up. And everything felt different, just better, more fluid, more congruent in every single context. So I love what you're saying about building that cushion, really maintaining an abundant mindset, and ultimately leaning into the outcome that we want to help the individuals create. I mean, both for ourselves and the companies that we're working with. As we wrap up today, Russell, as we're getting close on time.
I know we're on time, but I got to ask you a question. Sorry,
dude, please.
I got it. So scarcity versus abundance, big theme, and mindset. I think anyone who wants to and is committed to can, with relative ease, get themselves to an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset. You can read enough books and you can practice a meditation or two to get yourself there. My question back to you is, how have you found people doing a good job, or who's done a good job of sustaining that abundance mindset and making that the de facto point where someone's mindset lives? Because that for me has always been something I've wanted to. I can achieve the mindset, but sustaining and keeping that energized has always been something that I'm trying to be better at. How do you go about that?
I think that's a fantastic question. And I think there are really just two things that it comes down to. It's your environment and conditioning. It's not like simple example, you don't work out once and get the body you desire. You work out once and get the body you deserve, right? And it's the same thing when it comes to our mindset, because if we realize that fundamentally we are wired to look for fears, to look for dangers, to look for problems, and we gain awareness over that, then it becomes this point where we now start to accept, okay, this is a passing thought. It's a fleeting experience, emotion. And what I have the opportunity to do as a conscious being is shift my attention back to the things that empower me and serve me versus the ones that will drive me down a much darker path. And I think when we can learn to accept that this is the way that the brain works, that becomes ultimately very important. So we have to learn to consistently condition that muscle. It never stops. And I'm either, whether it's reading good books one week after the other, it's meeting with a group of other other high integrity professionals or men, whether it's working with a coach. I'm constantly doing one or a multitude of things to ensure that I am bombarding both my conscious and subconscious mind with the right inputs, because the world will give me enough of the negative inputs that I don't want to become the greater life experience. So I choose what I'm focusing on and maintain those inputs, and then surround myself with as many like-minded people as possible to ensure that I'm living at my highest version of myself. People that are going to hold me accountable, that are going to call me up. And I think this is important both in leadership teams and our friendship circles and the spouses that we choose and the way that we show up and parent our kids in every single context. So it's two things. It's environment and it is in conditioning. Surround yourself with the right people and continue to condition your mind with the most powerful, inspiring inputs that you can possibly do, so you are filling your cup constantly. That would be my thought.
I love that. Because the root of that answer is it requires constant work. It's energy, right? It's the only way to beat entropy is energy. I love the way you frame that up, Zach.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's a great frame too. The only way to beat entropy is energy. I like that. I got to write that down. Well, to our audience, thank you guys for spending your time with us on the Perpetual Growth Podcast, and a big shout out to Russell Scherwin for bringing us so much value to today's conversation. Russell, where can our listeners either connect with you or learn more about what you're working on or get in touch? What's the best way for people to reach out?
Yeah, the best way to reach out is come look at me at LinkedIn and say hi. You can also go to my website, which ChatGPT is building for me right now at www.b2btracks.com. It's a little scary to think that ChatGPT did in a couple hours what I couldn't do in months. But just, Russell Scherwin, come say hi to me at LinkedIn, and I'm always chatting there. Appreciate you having me, Zach.
Absolutely. Thank you, Russell. Now, if this episode sparks something for you, don't keep it to yourself. Make sure to share it, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, and help us reach even more people on their growth journey. And remember, growth doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. We'll see you next time.